Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pomerium live stream. We've got our first guest today. So I've been doing some live streaming on the channel, but part of the YouTube channel is we're just putting out a bunch of community content. So uh, I won't say this every time. It's just this is the first one, but basically, we're just interested in people in the open source ecosystem and in security infra, open source everything, and we're just excited to chat with people at these orgs and projects. And I'm super excited to chat with Bekah Hawrot Weigel today from the Linux Foundation. Hey, Bekah, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks so much for having me. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, no, yeah, thanks again. I know you're super busy, so really appreciate you taking the time to come hang. I know, well, we're all busy, I guess, but so uh, we'll kind of go into it here. We're definitely going to talk about the Linux Foundation, but I kind of want to get to that point by talking a bit about open source because that's where we both met. That's kind of where a lot of your career, and at least I'd say the last 4 or 5 years, has been. Um, for folks, I guess, yeah, for folks who don't know you, how did that journey kind of all begin to get into open source?
Yeah, so I'm a career changer. So I spent 10 years teaching college English before moving into tech. And when I did, I was doing some front end development after going to a boot camp. And then that's probably when the pandemic hit and just kind of like turned everybody's world upside down. And so I started a community called Virtual Coffee, which is where I met Nick. And we really were inspired by the principles of open source, this idea of
Yeah,
community and engaging and collaborating together. And so a lot of what we did was kind of driven by those core principles. But then we also said, like, hey, we're all in technology. It makes sense for us to do things together. So we have our
yeah,
website, we have our community docs, all of those projects are open source. And then we did our very first year, which was in, I guess, April of or October of 2020, we did
yeah.
a big Hacktoberfest push.
Okay.
And if you're not familiar with Hacktoberfest, that's a month long like exploration of open source where everybody does it together. It's been sponsored by DigitalOcean in the past. And the goal is to get 4 pull requests in that month. And so we provided support through mentorship. We opened up projects. We did contributions together. So all of these things we were really excited about. And then we were like, wow, this is like really amazing to be able to collaborate together. And I think that first year I ran a project which was a React Native project. And so I had a lot of
Okay.
people from the community contributing, and my much in React. But so we were kind of like learning together as well. And just like a really great experience to work with other people, share, and to like grow together. Of like how things
Okay.
started from open source, and then it kind of expanded, like I'm a real big for if there's a project that you just support them. So if you see a problem, then it's a good time to an issue or to engage community and figure out how you can support them.
Yeah, no, for sure. I know you were mentioning your internet before the live stream. It's breaking up a little bit. I can still hear you, but just wanted to mention that in case you need to adjust
Sorry.
it. I know you said you might have to switch the thing. No, it's all good. Also, just want to say hey to Danny Thompson in the chat over on YouTube. Thanks for joining, my man. Danny's other good people, obviously. I'm excited to go hang at his conference in I think it's September. That's the date now for Commit Your Code. So go meet some more folks that I know from open source and other stuff. But cool. Yeah. So yeah, like you said, yeah, that's how we met. Full disclosure, me and Bekah worked together prior to the Linux Foundation at a company called Open Sauce. You did a lot of great work there. And then eventually, we don't need to go into all the details, but basically, the Linux Foundation acquired Open Sauce, and you're working over there now. And for folks that don't know what the Linux Foundation is, or maybe they've heard of it, but don't really know exactly what it is, I guess what's the TLDR on the Linux Foundation?
Yeah, so the Linux Foundation is really interesting. It's kind of an umbrella organization that tries to bring together open source projects and to support the ecosystem. So
Okay.
they're teaching open source in a lot of different ways. So, like, we have over 1,000 projects, and this is where we support them, we nurture them. We also bring together about 17,000 contributing organizations and about 800,000 developers last year, I think, contributing code.
Yeah.
Then we also do things like events and training. And so the idea, I think, is to provide this like very well-rounded experience that we can support people, whether as an individual member, as an organization, or a project, to ensure that there's a stable and exciting future for open source.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, and there's a lot going on in there. Like, I'm I'm somewhat familiar with it, even though our company got acquired with it by it. But I know they offer like trainings and stuff too, and they organize a lot of events. Like I'm going to KubeCon Europe with Pomerium where I work, and I'm like I can see it right on the page here, KubeCon plus Cloud Native Europe. So they organize big events like that as well. They're really into the open source community. Obviously, I mean, I guess the giveaway is kind of Linux in the name. Um, I I don't know. I'm putting you on the spot a bit, but I don't know if you know. Did this originally just start off as just for Linux, and then it just expanded to kind of open source in general, or?
Yeah, I think I know I took a training when I first started 3 months ago, but I know like there's definitely been those core principles and supporting the Linux kernel project.
Yeah,
And I think the idea is just like it's continued to grow and that we see like there's value in all of these projects. And so taking that understanding of everything that's made that such a great project and figuring out like how can we grow that to continue to support other projects and to see that same success seems like part of the pathway.
yeah. No, totally, totally. And so, like, what you're doing over there right now. So, like, when we worked together at Open Sauce, you were leading DX over there, and you did I would say probably the majority of our written content.
Yeah.
I mean, I know like John, myself, and some others did some as well, but you were pretty much on top of that for the most part. And now that you're at the Linux Foundation, are you still doing similar work, or what are the kinds of things you're working on over at the Linux Foundation?
Yeah, so I've been at the Linux Foundation for about 3 months, and so I think we're still like finding out like what is the best path here. So I came onto a team that was pretty new.
Okay.
I think that they had only been around 3 months before me, and then we have there's another team that we work kind of jointly with on a lot of projects, and they were a month and a half ahead of me. So we're
Okay.
all still like figuring out, what is the best path for this, but I've been doing a lot of support for social media and understanding, like, okay, how can we prioritize content there and speak to our audience in a meaningful way? Because, the
Yeah.
Linux Foundation does these great things like trainings and events, but, like, we're also doing great projects internally.
Hmm.
We also have all of these foundations that are doing wonderful work. And like, there's so many thought leaders in the space that are at the Linux Foundation. So for me, it's like, okay, how do we like start to highlight this? How do we let people know about these things that we're doing? And so yeah, you just dropped that YouTube short series for the Linux Foundation, so I've been doing
Yeah.
this was like week 3 of quick hits. And
Okay.
so it's just like an overview, a 60-second overview of some of the cool things that are happening. So that's part of it. I wrote a blog post recently, and that's going to continue as well. And so that was on innovation in AI and kind of like what is the responsible way to move forward? Like, how do we do
Yeah.
great things with AI without just totally doing something dangerous or insecure? Like,
Totally.
how do we move that forward? So, for me, I think that there's definitely more writing in the future. It's been a lot of collaborating and understanding how the teams work together, especially with other teams like education and events as well.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Like speaking of AI, like we're like a security company, and like we put out some pieces about like just securing AI recently. There's lots. It's kind of like somewhat uncharted territory for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so like it's becoming more and more important to, like you said, not do bad things because like people will, like anything good in the world, people use it for bad too. But like also just securing that stuff, like, you know what I mean? Like people have like IP behind some of these things. So it's like
Yeah.
just lots of interesting stuff going on. And I know because I'm still new to Kubernetes, so I've been listening to there's a Kubernetes podcast from it's a couple people, or it's Google that runs it, but I was listening to the recap of KubeCon 2024. I'm just trying
Mm.
to get up to speed like Neo in the Matrix here real quick, but security was like a big thing, and just AI is what a lot of people are talking about for obvious reasons. So that's great. Yeah, I actually dropped that best practices for I can't speak today,
Sustainable.
sustainable AI. So if folks want to check that out, I gave that a read last week. It was a good one. I
Thanks,
can
Nick.
I'll just pop it up on the Jumbotron for a sec if folks want to see it. I have a feeling it's super long, but because I put good enough. Anyways, it's okay. I'll
You
let
can
people
find
take
it's
two
like the
minutes to read
fourth
that.
one on the blog. So if you just go to linuxfoundation.org blog, I think it's the fourth one or close to the
Okay,
top. So
cool. Yeah, I'll drop a link to that. And so you're making it really easy for me to segue to things today. Hey, Ayu, how's it going? Nice to see you. Here, I'll just drop the blog if folks want to check that out. That's just a lot easier. Lots of great content there. And this kind of brings us to kind of like the title of the live stream is "What's your content stack?" And we had talked previously about this, but it's one thing to create content, but it's one thing to make meaningful or engaging content,
yeah.
especially for developers too. And I really kind of want to dig into this and to give some background. Like you were a teacher, like an English major, like you know what you're doing, and you've literally written a book too, like a teen, what was it, a teen
Actually,
not
like have a copy of it on my
oh,
desk.
there we go. Yeah, so like you know what you're doing when it comes to writing. So I guess let's touch on that. Like, what have you seen where, like, I'm sure you read a lot of things and you're like, that's kind of meh, or like what I guess what are things you usually look for when you start to write something meaningful? Like, I'm sure you outline and
Yeah.
stuff, but like what's I guess kind of what's your process, the secret sauce, as B. Dougie always says.
Yeah, so I think like one of the challenges that we see with content now is that there's so much AI generated content. And like already was an overload of content that was out there.
Yeah,
And so now like we're competing with AI stuff. But I think that audiences tend to um move towards something that's personal and something that's meaningful to them. So for me, I think like especially when I was writing at Open Sauce, it was about addressing a problem that people were having, and then talking about like how do you solve that problem or how do you approach that problem. Um, just sorry,
yeah,
reading Josh's quote though.
yeah.
Yeah, I got
Yeah,
two
yeah.
teenagers, so I feel that.
Cool, cool.
um, so like it is so a lot of the content that I created before was driven around like, hey, I saw this tweet, or we were always dropping we had a random channel in our open source Slack where people were dropping news that they read or tweets that they
Yeah,
saw. And then it's like, okay, yeah, like this is a problem that people are facing, and you can kind of see it based on the engagement. Like, oh, tons of people were talking about this.
yeah,
And so, like if you want to write something meaningful, or especially like if you're creating content for a company, like on a blog, for instance, it's not like, hey, we're gonna push our product, right? It's like, hey, there's
yeah,
a problem. Let's talk about this problem, and then let's see how the product can solve some of those problems. And you don't even have to say like sign up for our product, like it will
Yeah.
solve your problems, right? Show, like there's a big saying in writing, like show don't tell. And I
Yeah.
think that the same thing goes if you're doing tech writing as well, or content creation at all, that like, hey, show them why this is useful for them,
Hmm.
solve that problem. And if you can do that, then at the very least they're probably going to remember. And like that's even goes for conference talks. Like
Yeah.
if people show me I can solve a problem with a product, I'm not going to remember exactly how they did it, but I'm going to know like, oh, okay, I can use this to solve my problems, and I'm going to go and I'm going to look at that. I'm going to look at their documentation, or if I get
Yeah.
stuck, I'm going to like ping that person and say like, hey, do you have like a guide or a GitHub repo or something that I could look at to help me
Yeah.
figure this out? So it's like that inspiration part, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, Josh is saying 100. Um, yeah, I want to get back to like documentation and guides and stuff, but like what were you saying before, about like we hear this all the time, developers do not want to be sold to, you
Yeah.
know, at the same time, I think we kind of get sold to, but like when it's done well, and like, yeah, I think that's the struggle. And like like right now I'm doing developer advocacy at Pomerium, but I'm under marketing, which is cool. Like people complain about that, but I'm like, I got a great team. It's like I don't care that I'm under marketing, and I'm learning other stuff about the business anyways this way. But there is a fine line, like, between like you have a good product, or hopefully you have a
Yeah.
good product. How do you convey that without making it a sales pitch immediately? You know what I mean? Because you can,
Yeah.
that's a fine line that you can like tip the scales really quickly.
Yeah.
And like I'm even thinking about this right now because like I'm still new to the team, so I'm like about uh yeah, literally 1 month today, actually. And I've started to submit some talks, and I've been submitting a talk about, uh, we don't need to go into all the details, but basically zero trust security, which is what our product is based off of in terms of architecture and principles. And I've been using an analogy to explain it. Like I did a YouTube short, and I have a short write up about it, and I submitted a talk to a few places using that analogy that I have in my shorts. It's about like comparing it to an airport, and like that whole part will work for the talk because I'm not even talking about the product. But I'm struggling with like, and some conferences are like, it's cool, like if you use your product to show what you were explaining, but not make it a sales pitch. So I don't think I'm doing a sales pitch with it, but like to show like literally how these principles work, I have to use our product. So, and
Yes.
like I don't know like if some conferences, like speaking of talks at least, like is that okay? Like because like how else do you demo it unless you literally recreate the product at a lesser scale, I guess. So like I don't know if you have thoughts on that. Like, you know what I mean? It's I hope I'm conveying myself properly here. Oh, you froze for a second. We'll pause while Becca's internet comes back.
You are.
Uh,
I think my internet.
oh, hey, yeah, you're breaking up still. Um, yeah, we'll give it a second here. It's okay, don't sweat it. But we'll just pause for a second. If you can still hear me, I think you said you could switch your internet. Maybe try that, but we'll give it a second. Um, while Becca is unfreezing, I'm just gonna say hello to a few people in the chat. Hey, Roxy, I see you over on YouTube now. Yeah, I think some people start off at LinkedIn and then they just end up over here. So I'm just gonna check with Becca just in our chat to see if her internet is doing okay or coming back. Give me 1 second here. Yeah, okay, yeah. I think you'll need to change your internet. Just dropping her a quick message. Yeah, if you can hear my voice, clap once. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, Becca usually has solid internet. There was, I think, a storm or some kind of construction affected something. So we'll give it a second. Um, yeah, I just dropped her a message in the Slack we're in. Anyways, while Becca is thawing, I guess. Yeah, so we'll just recap. We're talking about content right now, and like, yeah, I'm curious about thoughts too, Josh. Since I know you've given a lot of talks, and you were, I was in one of your one-on-one, not one-on-ones, virtual coffee. Yeah, Becca's gonna come back. That's why she just dropped. Um, but Josh, in terms of talks, I'm curious about your thoughts about like when, like kind of the context I was giving, where like I have a whole talk that is not gonna talk about the product at all, but I do have a demo at the end, and I can really only show what I'm talking about by actually using our product. And I'm curious if what your thoughts are, Josh, since you've given a lot of talks. And to be clear, like our product is open source, it's open core. So like, but still, I kind of wonder about that, um, because I could create. Yeah, oh, Becca's just saying, no worries. Cool, cool. Yeah, Becca's just switching her internet connection. Yeah, Josh says, I feel like the teacher just called on me and asked me to stand up in front of the class. Yeah. 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 No pressure. I guess it's more the fine line between sales pitch and like I'm just demoing with our product, because that's how I have to convey what I was just talking about. That's kind of more the what I was getting at, I guess. Um, and yeah. And also anybody else in the chat, if you have thoughts on that too. But yeah, I guess I am the teacher asking you to stand up in front of class, Josh. And while Becca is coming back into the matrix, yeah, here I'll just put this on the jumbotron. Yeah, so it's a tough situation. I like when those talks focus on explaining the problem, an ideal solution, and tie the product itself to that solution. Okay, yeah, yeah. And yeah, I guess like obviously when you submit these CFPs, like the ones I submitted, I just said like I need to use our product to demo it, and the CFP guidelines said it's okay to show your product, at least the ones I submitted to for this particular talk, but don't make it a sales pitch. And that's not the goal of my talk. It's really to convey the principles. Yeah. Okay. While Becca is coming back in the matrix. Okay. Yeah. Let's see here. Yeah. Let's put this one on the jumbotron. So you're saying, yeah, David from X State does this really well. A lot of his talks explain why you want state machines, explain the state machines, and let you know what the last. Okay, it was X state all along. Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I guess I don't feel too bad. It's more just like I don't want talks rejected if they think it's a sales pitch, and I try to make it clear at least that it's not. And you've always wanted to be a cool kid. Cool, cool, awesome. Um, cool, cool. While this is loading up, I'm just gonna share my screen for a second. I'm gonna go to the Linux Foundation again. And let's just go ahead and share that. So here's the blog that Becca was talking about. If folks want to check out a lot of the content there, Becca's been writing there. Obviously, other people too. But they have other things. I don't know where it is. I think it's training. I'm just freestyling here at the moment. That's what we do during things that are live. And yeah, I know they have all kinds of training as well. And um, I'm not positive, but I think there are free trainings too. But I know there's some you have to pay for. But they have a lot of stuff going on in here. So um, for anybody that's interested, you can check all that stuff out too. There's like all kinds of stuff under education, I guess. You can see the full catalog here. Okay, yeah. So these are some paid ones. I could have sworn I saw some. Yeah. So there are some free ones. Like obviously, I think some of these are to pass exams, so that's probably why you have to pay for them eventually. But anyways, just wanted to share that. Um, cool, cool. I'm just chatting to Becca real quick. All good. Just chatting with the chat. Cool. All right, so let's turn that off here. Cool. Yeah, you get to see my big mug on the screen again. Tell tell us a joke. Okay, yeah, yeah. I don't know. Okay, I could do a terrible joke. What do you call cheese that's not yours? Nacho cheese. Anyways, yeah, exactly. That's like Academy Award winning joke there. Um, cool, cool. Becca is back. All right. Hey, how's it going? I
Sorry about
I
that.
w-
I had to move locations altogether, so welcome to my dining room.
I'll good. And honestly, don't sweat it. I know you said there was problems in the city with the internet at the moment. And also I was just kind of just to recap, I was kind of just asking Josh because he's given a lot of talks about like, that sales pitch fine line and stuff. And he said it depends, but like he's saying like kind of what you were saying, as long as you convey like in your talk, like it's not a sales pitch, you're just talking about the problem space or like
Yeah.
the principles of something, and then you use your product, that's generally considered okay. And then I also told a joke, what do you call it? Cheese that's not yours, nacho cheese. It was terrible, but that's how we roll.
The content
um
I'm here for.
yeah,
When I say like,
exactly.
I agree with Josh, and I gave a talk at Web Unleashed in, I think it was in October, and I talked about maintainer burnout, right? Which is a
Yeah,
problem. And so, as part of that, like I provided data and research, but that data was presented using the open source product. I was still working
yeah,
at open source at the time. And so, it was like very clear, like this is an open source graph. This is,
yeah,
some data that I pulled from this open source thing. So, I think that there it was talking specifically about maintainer burnout, but it was like showcasing the product. And so
yeah,
I think like that's the kind of stuff that's effective because people want their problem solved. I mean, that's
yeah,
how I
totally.
end up buying stuff at like 2 a.m. on an Instagram ad because I'm tired and I can't sleep. And they're like, you have this problem. I do. They're like, buy it now with one click. And I'm like, okay. So,
Yeah, I feel that. Funny side story, but I used to work in restaurants, and I like started off as a dishwasher, line cook, then busboy, then eventually a waiter. And this one restaurant I was working at, you'd finish late. It was like in a hotel, and so like I'd be getting home at like 1 a.m., 2 a.m. sometimes, and then I would basically have supper slash, I don't know what you call supper, breakfast, breakfast, I don't know. Anyways, uh and I would watch like some bad late night TV movie before, this is before streaming, and they had infomercials, and there was this pasta maker that came on, and I'm like, I eat pasta all the time, I need a pasta maker. So I literally bought a pasta maker. So when you're tired, yes, those things do work. And I
so that,
so
I
I
guess that's the other key to like content and getting people to buy your product. Talk to them when they're very tired,
Yeah,
and then have an easy sign up link.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, that said, I did use that pasta maker for many years. Also bought a food dehydrator another time, but anyways, yeah. So getting back to content in general. So like, I think we've kind of nailed it down with like the talks where how to avoid a sales pitch, and like you said
Yeah.
with open source, that was literally the only way you could actually showcase that particular topic, burnout, without literally recreating the product, doesn't make sense. Yeah. Okay. So I feel a little better about like this talk I'm submitting that I'll submit elsewhere too. Um, but in terms of like content, like getting back to what you're saying, like obviously technical stuff can be very detailed sometimes,
Mhm.
and it could be dry. So like I know you mentioned this a lot, but like, can you touch on storytelling? Because like, it's one thing to just like read stats or like
Yeah.
code snippets and stuff, but like, how do you like getting back to what you're saying about making it engaging?
Mhm.
If, I know you have lots of thoughts on this, so
Yeah. Yeah, I think you always want to think about your audience too. And so you want to put it in a format that your audience expects and understands. And you want to think about them as your user, right? Like, okay, where's my user starting? Why are they starting this? Why would they be here? And you can provide more information. And I think like, having breaking down your content too and providing it in bite-sized pieces is a big
Yeah.
part of that, adding code snippets, but like if you add a code snippet, you can make it fun, right? It doesn't have to be boring. Like when I was
Yeah.
doing boot camp, like the examples were always foo bar, which like I have feelings on that. I'm not going to talk about it here, but like
Yeah.
why? Like make it something interesting. I will say like the challenge with that is if you're working with a global audience, make sure that it's something that everybody in your audience can understand. I think
Yeah.
I listened to a talk once and somebody was saying they I can't remember what country they were from, but the example was all talking about like taking care of your lawn and like
Okay.
nurturing the grass and your plants and watering. But like where they lived there were not lawns. Like there were
Yeah. Yeah.
rocks, and they're like this doesn't hit, right, as the kids these
Yeah.
days say. um so I think that it's understanding the audience, balancing that thing, and being able to tell it in an approachable way. And I think there's this other, sometimes people just they'll expect like pretty dry documentation, and if you have an
Yeah.
audience that expects that and you're telling stories in there, they're probably going to get angry. It's like when you go to a recipe and
Yeah.
somebody like wants to tell the story of like their grandma's grandma and how it was handed down, and like
Yeah.
just give me the recipe, right? So sometimes
I feel
people want
I
to read.
feel that really badly. Any recipe I look up, it's always like that, and then there's also tons of ads, and it's like,
Yeah.
and yeah, totally feel that. Anyway, sorry, go on.
So this is why I asked ChatGPT to generate recipes for me, because it's so
Yeah,
much
yeah,
easier. And that's like also what you don't want your audience to do, right? Like if they're going to chat GPT, number one, oh, this is like a totally tangential topic, but like AI is probably training on your documentation. So if you have poor documentation, then AI is going to give people poor
yeah.
results back. So like invest in your documentation. But the second part of that is like sometimes people want to know the stories, they want to know the problems, but maybe the best place to do that isn't in your
Mhm.
docs. But you can include a reference to that and link to it, right? So
Yeah,
I think maybe on open source docs, we had like some guides for job seekers, right? And so
yeah,
we show you how to use the product, but we're not going to talk about that on the product page.
yeah,
But we're going to
totally.
say like, hey, if you want more context or you want to know how to use this as a job seeker, here's a way to do that. And then we
Yeah,
link over to that. So all of your material doesn't have to be in one place. And I find so early on when I was learning to code, I don't know if I should call it out or not, but I will. I really wanted to build a Gatsby site, right? And so
okay.
like Gatsby has tons of documentation, but I feel like they just like threw it all in a bowl and mixed it up a little bit.
Okay.
And there was so much to try and sort through. Like, I'm sure that they had valuable information there for every audience. But like,
Yeah.
if you're a storyteller, you got to make sure that you're like setting the scene and that there's a
Mhm.
map for your user to go on this journey. So, where should they be
Yeah,
going and how should they navigate this? And if they end up lost, like, how do they find their way back to where they need to be? And so, like,
yeah,
there's also that challenge of like, I've got too much information. So you have to really think about like the structure of how you're going to present the story to the people. And like if we go to like
yeah,
actual storytelling, there's usually like an act 1, an act 2, and an act 3. Okay? So you're kind of like
yeah,
setting the scene, and then you're like the act 2 will be like, oh, we're heightening things here, we're taking it to new levels. So like that's going to mean
yeah.
maybe the more advanced stuff, and then like the resolution is like, okay, you've shipped the thing or you've completed
Mhm.
the task, like here's some additional information that you might need to know about that. But
Yeah,
like that path has to be clear, otherwise you're going to lose the audience, and they won't want to come back. And I saw
yeah.
think I want to say somebody that leads a team at Netflix was talking
Okay.
about how when they're deciding whether or not to use a new product, she evaluates she goes to the documentation immediately. If the
Okay.
documentation is unclear, they automatically pass on that thing,
Okay.
because it's going to be a struggle for the team to implement that thing if there aren't good docs. And you don't want to
Yeah.
spend all your time creating support tickets trying to get answers because, maybe there's a support team and maybe there's not. So there's another plus one for good documentation.
Yeah.
Also, making it clear that, hey, we can implement this for our use case, or it's not going
Yeah.
to be super hard to figure out how to smooth this out.
Yeah, totally. Also, just want to say hey to Jono. Thanks for joining us. And a funny side note about Gatsby. So Gatsby got acquired by Netlify. I used to work at Netlify and I was on the frameworks team, so was working on it. And even like a couple weeks ago, I still get notifications. I haven't been removed from Gatsby stuff. I got like 1,000 notifications about some Gatsby stuff, and a PR that I'd done like a year ago, I think, or a year. Well, no, it was when I was at Netlify, so probably 2 years ago. And somebody made the tests finally pass, and so I got a like your PR has been merged. And anyways, just a side note. But um, but yeah, getting back to docs too, like uh, I don't know if we can. I'll try and find the link to that. But we when we were at Open Sauce, you hosted a live space on AI, and Jamin Holmgren from Infinite Red was talking about what you were saying about having the good docs is definitely going to affect, Chat GPT, Claude, in terms of giving you good answers. So definitely that. And you made a good point too, because like I'm always like having spoken to you quite a bit, like the storytelling aspect, but there is a case for when it just needs to be dry, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
It's like this is literally just code, like just look at it. But I guess this comes back to what you were saying, where like you can kind of dissect the piece, where like you have the storytelling and maybe link off to the dry part, maybe, and there's like it's not that it's more complicated, but you really do need to organize the documentation, like you said. Like there's an information architecture
Yeah.
hierarchy to this, and 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 I definitely agree that like when you see projects with good docs, it's super approachable. Like yesterday, I was live streaming on my two full two stack on the CFE dev channel, and I was going through Tanstack Start, meta framework for React, and Tanner Lindsley and all the contributors and maintainers over there have done such an excellent job of their documentation. It's like I also like the look of it, but also it's just like super approachable. And there's also kind of a table stakes thing nowadays, which is like your docs have to be searchable. Like it's a non-negotiable kind of nowadays, I think. And yeah, so anyways, just wanted to mention that. And one thing too I was gonna say about docs is like, because like I'm kind of done onboarding at work, but like part of my work is I'm going through docs now, and like I've noticed some stuff like because it's the usual thing. You've done something once, or you ran into a snag, and you're like, and then you just don't document it, or you just forget about it, or you just know maybe. And so like I was going through some of our docs just to get Pomerium set up in a certain use case, and it I couldn't get it up and running based on the code snippet
Yeah.
was there. So like I made it very more explicit and like literally everything to just copy pasta it. And so yeah, just this is just getting back to what you're saying about docs. I guess I guess the other thing too, like getting back to storytelling, is like typically do you try to make it relatable always, or is it just telling a story in general? Like, what I mean? Like devs are all over the map in terms of like just I don't know how we all act, I guess. But like, you know what I mean? Like, do you kind of like study who the potential audience is first before like even going that route, or just kind of picking your brain again in terms of your process? So.
Yeah, I think that if you know who your audience is, it definitely makes it easier. And sometimes you have to speak to a really broad audience.
Yeah.
And I find that like it becomes harder to make really effective content that's like, oh, somebody's going to reshare this thing when you're
Yeah.
speaking to a broad audience. I think that's okay. The goal is to like maybe look at it more strategically or holistically, and like this shouldn't be the only thing I write about this. Like I write
Yeah.
this thing and then I figure out like, okay, how can I talk about this in different ways to different people? Or like, if we go back to your content stack, the content stack thought process. I did do a Twitter space with John Papa from Microsoft once, and
Okay.
he like had this really great tidbit in there. I think he runs a dev advocate team, or leads it at some portion over there. But he said like he tells his team to create a piece of content and then just totally exhaust it. Like you're not done with that piece of content until you've made
Yeah.
all of the pieces of content. So that might mean like you start with one blog and then you break it down into a Twitter thread or a short video or a long video or a Twitter space. So it's
Yeah.
like this content creation life cycle. But the idea is that like you're capturing so many different audiences if you do that, and you can tell the story in a different way each time. And you'll find like, when we're talking about content for like LinkedIn versus X, it's going to be something different because the audience wants a different tone. They want a different style. There's different people in those spaces. And so I think
Yeah.
like the thing is like, okay, what is the primary audience here? And then you test out those other pieces when you're repurposing that content into different ways. And so, like there's so many different ways that you can do it. There's so many different tools that we can be using, and like AI is your friend. I know that people are like,
Yeah.
oh, you can't use AI to write. That's so bad. I don't know. Like it allows me to do the work of three different people if I use it.
Hmm.
So, I can be more efficient and effective at my job if I'm using that. Even something like, hey, I have this idea.
Yeah.
Here is my brain dump. How can I make this make sense? Or like, this sentence is really clunky. I'm tired.
Yeah.
It's the end of the day. Make it nice, right? Like, polish that thing for me.
Yeah.
And I've also used AI like, hey, rate this out of 10. Like, what are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What
Hmm.
are some things that I can do moving forward? And then it can hit me back with feedback, almost like I have an editor. So
Yeah. Totally.
and I think that can help also asking it questions like, hey, what audience do you think this is written for? Because I think
Hmm.
another problem that we see is like we have a tendency to be biased about our work, right? And think
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I really nailed this thing, right? And then you ask it its interpretation, and then it tells you something totally different. You're like, oh, I think I
Yeah.
missed the mark there. So now I need to do some revisions, or I need to rethink my approach here, or I need to
Yeah.
understand my audience a little bit better. And I think like especially for people who are speaking to a new audience, maybe you're hired on at using a technology you haven't before, then this becomes even more important because it's hard to know whether or not you're hitting the mark if you haven't been embedded in that community for a while.
Yeah, totally. And in terms of, I totally agree about the repurposing content. And I'm gonna drop a link to, this is open source. This is from Anthony Campolo, who I believe you know as well. But
Mhm.
uh, he created this project called Auto Show, and it helps him repurpose content and like pull transcriptions and stuff. Like you need to put like API keys for AI stuff, but if anybody's interested, this is a open source project that you can check out. It just kind of ties into what we're talking about. And I've definitely done this too, because like for Pomerium, for example, I'm trying to explain what zero trust security is. So I went with the analogy of an airport because the principles in zero trust security is like you're always verifying who this person is. Do they have the context? Like they are who they say they are, but do they have access to this thing based on criteria and stuff? And so I did that short, like I think that was like my second week. And then I was like, I repurposed that into my CFP for a talk now, which like obviously the short was only 60 seconds, but I would go deeper into it. And then I made a short post on DevTube. I basically pulled the transcription and then I edited the transcription. And I mention all this too because you're talking about AI, and there's a difference between just saying AI write me a blog post and like you've done something and then you start asking it questions or because that's typically how I use it too. I find it's like, I haven't tried the who's this audience for though, so I'm gonna put that in my back pocket. That's a good one. But like a lot of times, some things I'll do is like, it's winter right now, so I don't walk outside as much, just depending on the weather. But like, I found I'm curious how you start writing actually too, but like, I found like I am terrible at just starting to type something, and I'm not. I know there's a lot of people who have like a notebook and stuff. I just can't do the start writing pen and paper or pencil paper. So I've found like the unlock for me is, I've been using like, I use this tool called voice notes, but you can use whatever. And I basically just dictate what I want to talk about. It's very raw. And then I take that transcription and then I put that in like Claude, which you introduced me to with the projects and stuff, by the way, is awesome. But then I just say, generate me a draft based on my raw audio that I did. And then I just start shaping it from there and going, and it's like, yeah, I guess, how do you typically start writing? Like, are you a pen and paper person, or do you just start typing, or what's kind of what gets the brain juices flowing for you normally in terms of kickstarting something?
Yeah, I think it depends on the thing that I'm writing about. Because sometimes it's pen and paper. I take a lot of notes in pen and paper.
Okay.
But because I think I've often had to move really quickly, like last year at this time, I wrote one blog post a day every day. And
Oh
it was a
yeah, I
leap
remember
year. So
that.
there was like an extra day in February. I felt like really
Damn it.
unfortunate. Like, be over February. For that, I had some like good advice from you and I were both in this group, Big Cash Money, and Ryan, the coach, said like, hey, you're gonna burn yourself out, so try and find a repeatable process or a
Yeah.
framework that you can use. So like, if you do have a framework, that makes it easier. And so often
Yeah.
for me, the frame the kind of framework was like, oh, I saw a tweet or a Reddit post or whatever, something on social media where someone was talking about this issue, and I know a lot about that, or like, I know that
Hmm.
I can add to this conversation. And so
Yeah.
like, generally, like, I hated when I was in grad school for English, I hated writing introductions. Like, I would never
Okay.
start with the introduction. um I had this is an aside, but my first job out of college, I taught GED classes, which is graduate
Okay.
equivalent diploma in the US. So for people who didn't finish high school but wanted to get the certificate showing they had the knowledge of a high school graduate, they would often go to these classes. And I had this
Yeah.
student, and he would talk your ear off. Like, for 3 hours, he would just talk and talk and talk. You ask him to
Okay.
write something on a piece of paper, and he'd be lucky to write like two sentences in 1 hour. Just
Okay.
could not do it. Like, it was that mental block. And so for
Yeah.
him, it was like, let's have a conversation about it. Okay. So it's like
Okay.
very much like how you're using that notes tool, but like, his strength was in speaking and not in writing. And so like, we would
Hmm.
have a conversation, then it's like, okay, now write down that thing. For me, I also like, having projects is nice because I can move things in different places, but like, my brain
Yeah.
is all over the place at all of the times, right? And like, sometimes the ideas connect and sometimes they don't, or sometimes my brain is like, I think this connects, but I don't know where yet. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
like, I just will like brain dump in a document, and then that's often where AI can be really helpful too. I'm like, look, I have all these thoughts, pretty sure that they mostly work, but like, can you
Yeah.
help me organize this in a way that it's actually usable? And then sometimes I'll ask it like, is this way too much information, or like, do I have too much conflicting information? And then I could be
Yeah.
like, then it's like, well, it could be, but there's a balance, so you can find it maybe in this way.
Yeah.
And so that's like, kind of like, I just love a good brain dump when my brain is on fire, right? Like, because there's
Yeah.
different times too. Like, there are times where I could just sit down and write all day. There are other days where I'm like, this is a drag. I don't want to be writing. I want to be doing something else. And so then that process is going to look a little bit different.
Yeah.
A lot of times I'll look at like, so I kind of come more from a research perspective of like, okay, who else has said something about this? Or like, where can I verify that my
Yeah.
theory about this thing is correct? And then I just start pulling in those resources. And I'll take you way back to when I was in high school. I had to write a term paper on, I read think I read Crime and Punishment. No, was it Crime
Okay.
and Punishment? I don't know. It might have been a Tolstoy. It was a long Russian novel.
Okay.
And so I had note cards broken down for every single topic. So I like had,
Okay.
I don't know, probably at least 100 note cards of all these ideas that I had with resources on them. And then I would put them in order on the floor and
Okay.
then look at them and say, like, does this make sense? Like, essentially, like, I'm putting a puzzle together. Does this
Yeah.
make sense? And can I build a story out of this thing? And so then that comes back to the idea of storytelling. Like, does this all
Okay.
make sense together? Or is there a stronger way to put this together? Like maybe
Yeah.
you start with the solution and work backwards because that works better for your audience, or you just want to do something a little bit different and see if it's engaging. So,
Yeah.
um, and then I would say, like, one more thing, another way to kind of like break through when I'm stuck is maybe I'm not writing first. Maybe
Okay.
instead I'm creating a video, or I'm putting out a tweet about an idea, or I think Alex Hormozy, I used to listen to his podcast, but
Okay.
he tweets a lot and like real hot takes a lot of the times. But I heard him
Okay.
say in one of the podcasts that one of the things that he does is um he just kind of like puts all of his thoughts out there, and if he sees one gets like, hey, look, this really stuck, this really resonated with a lot of people, so now I'm going to explore this a little bit more. So it's kind of like testing the waters before he takes it to the next step. So I think, like,
Okay.
if you're more comfortable with other types of content creation, or if something is easier at this point and can help move you forward, then you just think strategically about, like, all right, what is the best thing, like, how can I move forward? If this is a way, then go ahead and try that out.
Okay. I just found him. Oh, also just want to say hey to Mike Cavalier. Nice to see you there over on YouTube. Um, yeah, I believe it's this person, Alex Hermosi. They work at acquisition.com and they have is the podcast The Game? Is that it?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, if folks want to check that out. So, yeah, okay, cool. Um, yeah, what was I gonna say? Yeah, I I think what you were mentioning before about the repurposing content is like a big unlock because like I I can't remember if I started doing that after talking to B Dougie or not, but like I might have. Yeah, I think he might have talked about it at some. This is before I was working at Open Source, but like I basically, like, for a concrete example, I did a live stream with the creator of Dino's Fresh web framework, and then I made some shorts out of that, and then I created a blog post out of that. Then I eventually converted it into a talk, and then so like it's
This is the
I
way.
don't yeah, and speaking of talks too, like we were talking about this in the virtual coffee CFP YouTube session, or maybe it was before, but like it's okay to submit the same talk, multiple times. Like I gave that fresh talk over 3 years, and initially when I started giving talks, I thought I had to create a new talk literally every time, which sounds silly now, but anyways, just wanted to mention that like you can you can get a lot of mileage basically.
I recommend. One year I submitted, I think it was like maybe 5 different talks, and I think maybe all of them got accepted. And it was such
Okay.
a stressful year because I had to write all of those talks, and I'm like,
Yeah,
go
yeah.
real deep into the process, and it's really time consuming for me. So I was very stressed out.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. We got about 15 minutes. I want to be mindful of your time. So like if you're good to chat for another 15, we can. If not, we can wrap up. But yeah, so there some people have joined a little later in the stream, and oh, I just see Jason Torres there as well. Hey Jason, good to see you. Yeah, so Jason showed up late, so he said content stack, give me the cliff notes, what did I miss? So if we do like a quick recap, just kind of what we've been talking about in your own words.
Yeah, so I think, always is important to, like, number one, know your audience. Who are you talking to? How can you make that information accessible to them? Number two,
Yeah.
like, what is the problem that they're having? Because they're going to understand whether or not to use your product or to sign up for your newsletter or whatever if you say like, hey, I can solve one of your problems, or like, I know this is a challenge that we all face,
Yeah.
right? Like Atomic Habits, what's the name of the guy?
Yeah.
James Clear writes that, right? Like, there's a problem. We have a hard time following through with
Yeah.
things. Like, how do you get better at sticking to that? Like, I think almost all of us have that problem. So it makes sense to read his book or to subscribe to his
Yeah.
newsletter. So find that problem, figure out how you can address that with your audience. Storytelling is a huge part of the thing that you do, whether it's in conversations like this or if it's in a blog post. But also understand like there are elements of that that are super important. So organization, you have to be really organized in the content that you're producing. Otherwise, you're going to lose your audience. And so there should be a pathway, there should be a journey that you kind of have an understanding of or mapped out in some way. There's lots of different ways to create
Hmm.
content. So utilize all of those ways and understand that the conventions of those different ways are different. So you might have drier documentation, but your blog post might be really
Okay.
interesting. How can you kind of combine those and link back and forth and like fully utilize all of the tools that you have to create content that's meaningful to your audience and also allows you to be both effective and
Okay.
efficient. So I think that's my
That's
my
That's pretty
overview.
awesome, actually. That was a great recap. I'm definitely going to use that as a speaking of repurposing content, that will be, coming to a theater soon near you as a YouTube short. Um, cool, cool. Yeah, I guess we could kinda wrap up since you've recapped, but, like, I mean, I'm happy to keep talking, obviously. I dropped a link to your newsletter again. Um, I'm gonna go ahead and also drop just the YouTube short series that you've been doing over at the Linux Foundation. This one, that YouTube short series, what was that related to again? That one was that an AI one or?
So no, that one's our
Okay,
quick hits. So basically, we recap things that have been happening in LF open source over the last week. So it's like kind of the highlight
okay,
reel of the things that we're doing. And just like to kind of go along with this conversation, I would say, do things that make you uncomfortable. Like
yeah,
that's okay. I don't particularly like creating
okay,
video. I do not. It's so hard, and like to create a 1 minute short, it takes me. I'm getting better at it, but like initially, it's taking me like an hour to do this like
yeah,
1 minute thing, right? And part of that is like I've gotten better tools. So I have a teleprompter app for my setup, but also like you don't want to look like you're reading. That's
I
really
know.
hard for me,
I've
and
been
I also want
struggling
to
with
get
that
it
too.
right. So I have found that like the last one that I recorded I think was the best, and it's because I like stepped
Okay,
back, and so the teleprompter was further forward. Um, and Mark Texan has some really good tips about how to do
yeah,
this, right? But so it's like all about experimenting with like, okay, what is the visual here? Because when I'm up here, it's really easy to
yeah,
see like where my eyes are going. But when I'm here, and then I also like shrunk the teleprompter so it has like 3 words, slowed down the speed, and
yeah,
then like I'm lucky I have someone that will edit for me. So if I'm a little like before I was just trying to nail the one
okay,
minute
yeah,
mark, right? And so then I'd have to do, okay, I was like 102, I got it. But she's like, I can speed it up so we hit that 1 minute mark and you don't have to like redo it a
yeah,
million times. Um, so that was helpful. But I also say like also like nobody asked me to do YouTube shorts.
yeah,
Nobody asked me to do videos. But I was like, I think that this can provide value to our audience. So we're going to test it out. And so my goal right now is if I'm going to try something new, I'm going to test it out for at least six
yeah,
weeks and I'm going to see how it does before I make any decisions about that. So I think like test it out. You're not going to be
mhm,
great at it at first. And it might look terrible. When I wrote my blog, you can see my very first blog post on my
yeah,
blog if you go all the way back. And like I intentionally have it there in case people want to see how
mhm,
bad it was, because it's okay. Like we grow and we progress. And, I have a master's in English, but like, I was just not comfortable talking
yeah,
about tech. And I was just like, you can probably feel the nervousness reading it. But the idea is like we get better as we
mhm,
go on, and sometimes like we go backwards and we get bad at something, but like you just gotta regroup and like,
yeah,
okay, that didn't hit, I've gotta change this up, or I didn't perform well. Why didn't I perform well in that situation? And then you
Hmm.
figure it out, and then you do better the next time. So,
Yeah.
it's never about getting it perfect. And it's also, it doesn't have to be about saying something new
Yeah.
either, right? It's about relating to the audience, which is important, because I think that's, Nick, I know that you've heard it at Virtual Coffee a bunch, where people are like, but everybody's already written about
Yeah.
everything, but it doesn't
Totally.
matter, right? Like, you have your own story, and you can connect with other people by telling that story, by presenting the information in a way that somebody else might
Hmm.
relate to. So, like, you are uniquely you, and that gives you, an advantage in being able to talk to other people. Just like, let that shine
Yeah.
through.
No, totally. And like a perfect example of this is like I've been doing React and TypeScript for years, and I something I write might not really work well for somebody who's literally never done TypeScript, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I think that's where the opportunity is like, hey, I just learned something in TypeScript, let me write about it. And that will probably resonate with people new to TypeScript. And it's not because I'm not trying to cater to the beginner audience. It's just maybe I'm too far gone to be able to convey it in that way. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. Um, and like you said too, like people understand things in different ways as well, and like and even different media. Like there's some people that just don't read blogs. It's just like shorts or video now, it's like I've even noticed for myself like long blog posts now, like even if they're good ones, I
Yeah.
typically I use Microsoft Edge for my browser even on my phone, and I just have it read it out to me. And like I can do this when I'm walking or if I'm working out or some not working out because I have the trainer. Shout out Apple Kyle from Apple Fitness. But anyways, but like if I'm like doing something boring where or like errands or something, I can just listen to it. So like, and that's my way to still consume it, but like I just don't want to read it right now, maybe. So it's like there's just so many different ways people learn. So yeah, I totally agree. Just put the content out there, and like you were saying, like it might be bad the first thing, or maybe a bunch of the stuff you write is not great, but just get in the motions, like uh and this is a whole other side topic, but then this is kind of like, you know, building in public, writing, like putting your stuff out there, can't guarantee you're gonna help you get a job, but like a lot of people do see if you're consistent, they're gonna notice it over time, even if they're not reading all your stuff or watching all your videos. So, and it's just throwing that out there too. But yeah, um, I guess it's a good place to kind of wrap up because like that was such a great recap you gave there, and I know I could talk to you like literally all day, but we both have jobs, so we need to go work. But this has been really great. And also, thanks again for being our first guest on the Pomerium live stream. For folks who checked out the stream today, loved all the chat. Thanks so much for everybody for joining. We've got a lot of great guests coming up, including John McBride, who is my old coworker, but he's heading up infrastructure and AI engineering over at Linux Foundation. We're going to be talking about a Go project for building agents for AI. And I've got Angie Jones coming on too. If you just check out the YouTube channel or the events on Pomerium on LinkedIn, she's going to be talking about Goose, which is an open source project, AI related as well. And who else do we have? Oh yeah, and also there'll be more guests, but Brian Rinaldi is also going to be joining, talking about Local Stack, which is how you can do local development with AWS. And definitely going to have more people, but definitely check it out. Like even if you're like I don't need Pomerium for whatever I'm doing, the point of these streams is really I'm just trying to build out some content here for the community. So hopefully people find it engaging and helpful. And yeah, with that, thanks everybody. And Becca, if you don't mind just staying on for 1 second, and everybody
Yep.
else, uh, I'll probably be live streaming, just building something maybe tomorrow, probably Monday, if you want to check that out. And cool.